some of this potting soil here and I'm going to put it into my tray. And you don't need to fill up your tray to the top. The soil only needs to be about 1 inch deep at most. For me, that's going to be about 2.5 of these cupfuls. Here's my tray of soil. I'm going to break up any clumps and take out any big sticks that I might see. And now I want to level it out. So I'm going to smooth out my soil to make it really level and even in all the corners and all over, so that we have a nice flat and level seed bed to later seed our microgreen seeds. Sometimes giving a little shake like that helps it to settle in. Now we're going to need to wet the soil really well. One of my favorite ways for determining how much water you need is by feeling the weight of your tray. So when I lift it up now, I can feel it's very, very light because my soil is so dry. And if I get a feel for that and I remember the weight of it, how that feels in my hands, then when it feels nice and heavy, I'll know it has enough water. So I like to take it over to the sink and use the sprayer. But if you have a gentle watering can, you could also use that. So I want to get it on a nice and gentle spray. You want to water all the soil in your tray very evenly. I can tell by the weight it's getting heavier, but it still needs some more. You want to make sure all of that soil is well hydrated. Okay, that should be good. And of course you want to make sure that there's not too much excess water in the bottom, because that could also be an indication that you watered too much if there's excess just sitting in the bottom that doesn't get soaked up. Now you can just eyeball how much seeds you use, but if you really want to get scientific about it, I recommend using a scale that can measure grams. A little $10 kitchen scale, one of those little digital scales will work great. So in this cup, I've already weighed out 11 grams of seed. The larger the seed, the higher the weight, the more you're going to need. The smaller the seed, the less the weight is going to be. So this is only 11 grams of some brassica seeds versus 150 grams or 160 grams of something like pea seeds or sunflower seeds if you were growing sun shoots. Of course, you want to use as many seeds as you can to get the largest harvest, but if you use too many seeds and the plants are too crowded, then they might not grow as well and you could develop mold or fungus problems. And as you practice and the more times you grow microgreens, you'll learn the right amount of seeds to use. This is the hardest part, where you really want to make sure you spread your seeds evenly. So I like to hold my cup about maybe 6 inches above the tray and slowly shake it like this. And I like to try to focus on the corners and the edges first, because those tend to get neglected. So I'll go around the edges like this. And then I'll do a pass over the whole tray. And just slowly broadcast the seeds, making sure that they're all evenly distributed. Looking for any spots that might need some extra, you can fill those in. Some people use shakers, like those Parmesan cheese shakers that you'll see at a pizza shop, but you just got to find one with the right size holes for different kinds of seeds. But those can be helpful if you have trouble with controlling how much seed you're spreading. So microgreens grow pretty densely together, as you can see. These seeds are, there's a lot of seeds in there. I'll give you a close-up. And that's about what it should look like after it's seeded. So now we've got to water these seeds in. We're not going to cover them with soil, believe it or not, as you might do if you were to plant them out in the garden. Instead, we're just going to water these, and then we're actually going to cover it with another tray. I'll show you in a minute, but let's water these in first. So like I said, we're not going to cover these seeds with soil. What I'm going to do is take another tray. I should have told you in the beginning, you'll need a third tray for this, one without holes. And I'm going to put it right on top of those seeds. And that's going to act as the covering for the seeds. And you can even put a little weight in there to weight it down a little bit, to help push those seeds into the soil, to have good seed to soil contact. A couple books will work perfect. So you might be wondering at this point, well, if you cover the seeds with a tray and books, then how are they going to get light? Well, believe it or not, for the first 4 days, they're in blackout. They don't need any light, and it's best if they don't have light. What we're doing is we're mimicking what happens to when the seeds are under the soil. Remember, when seeds first start growing, they're usually under the soil, and they're not getting any light. They're in the dark, and it's nice and moist, so those seeds can germinate and start to grow. And so that's what we're doing here. So for the first 4 days, they'll be in blackout. And that's everything we have to do for day 1. And now we're done until day 4. And so then on day 4, we'll take these out and we'll put them under the lights for about 6 to 10 days. Now I've actually got 2 trays stacked up here, because after I filmed the other day, I ended up seeding a second tray. This is what they look like after 4 days germinating in blackout. All the times I've done this so far, I've never had to water them during the 4 days while they're germinating in blackout. They hold in enough moisture under there. Of course, you can still check on it to make sure, but in my experience, I've never had to water them during blackout. Now, as you can see, the little baby leaves that are starting to develop are yellow because they have not been exposed to light yet. They have not started photosynthesizing. And this is how they're supposed to look. If you look very, very closely, down at the soil level, you might see some little white fuzzy stuff. Now, it's important to be able to distinguish the difference between root hairs and mold. So here's some good examples here where you can see the root hairs are these kind of straight looking little white hairs coming off of the bottom of the plants. Now, a lot of people often confuse this with mold. You can look it up online, mold on microgreens, to get some pictures to see the difference. Okay, so the next step. So I've got my timer, and I set the timer to come on at 6 o'clock in the morning and to turn off at 10 o'clock at night. So that means it'll be on for 16 hours. I'm gonna turn the light switch on, and once I turn this on, I'm gonna leave it on, because remember, the timer will automatically turn off the lights. Okay, so it is the beginning of day 2. The microgreens have had 1 full day under the light, and let's have a close-up look. As you can see, they're already photosynthesizing. They're turning green. So next thing, I'm gonna feel the weight to see how much water they have in them. Okay, so the beginning of day 6, they've had one full day in the light, and they feel a little bit lighter, but they still have some good weight to them. And I look at the soil, I feel the soil a little bit. I think it's still moist. I might look underneath, see if there's roots coming through, which there are roots coming through the holes, and that's good. So I'm not gonna water these now, but I'll probably check them again at the end of the day to see if it needs water. But I think probably, certainly by tomorrow morning, it would definitely need some water, I suspect. So that's something you get the feel for the more you do it. If you're a little uncertain at first whether you have root hairs or mold, don't worry about it too much. Just be patient. Let them grow up for a few days. You'll start to notice the health of the microgreens. If there might be some fungus or mold, there might be some patches of microgreens that just don't look healthy as those plants start to mature a little bit. There are some good practices and guidelines that you can follow to avoid running into mold problems. The first thing is you always want to make sure that when you're starting to grow some microgreens that the trays you're using are all sanitized. So you can do that by washing them well with some water that has either a little bit of bleach in it or with some hydrogen peroxide. If you do find you start running into some problems with mold, number one, you can use a spray bottle with some food grade hydrogen peroxide diluted in water that you can spray the seeds with after planting. Or you can use a fan, just a small fan, even a little computer fan, just to create some airflow around the plants. And having that increased airflow will usually eliminate any potentials of mold. And in the worst case scenario, you do ever have some trays of microgreens growing that do have some mold, it doesn't necessarily mean that you have to get rid of the whole tray. If you find a couple little patches of mold, you can sometimes just pick out the plants and the mold from that little section, and the rest of the crop will still be fine. Okay, it's the beginning of day 7 from when we first started the seeds, and the beginning of day 3 under the lights. And I can tell by the weight now they've gotten very light, so they definitely need some water. So I usually find that 1.5 to 2 cups of water is a good amount. And this is how we bottom water. And that's it. I'll check them again tomorrow. So it's Thursday afternoon and I'm about to go home. I'm not going to be back here in my office until Monday. So I'm actually going to take these trays of microgreens home with me and I'll finish them off for the next few days in my big south-facing window in the natural light. So these microgreens have had about 10 days in the light so far. And I've had to water them probably about every other day. and they're definitely ready to harvest. So here's two examples of microgreens that are starting to develop their first set of true leaves. On this, I think that's probably maybe a red Russian kale. You can see those heart-shaped cotyledon leaves, and then right there in the middle, you can see the first true leaf, which is what the mature leaves will ultimately look like. Similar on this, that might be a mustard or a mizuna, because it's the same family, Brassica family, as the kale. It's got those heart-shaped seed leaves, the cotyledons, and then it's developing its first true leaf right there. And so this is a microgreen. It's anywhere from the cotyledon stage to the first true leaf stage. And so these are definitely ready to harvest and eat. So you can harvest your microgreens all at once and store them in the fridge in a sealed container, or you can just harvest a little bit each day as you need it. And to harvest, you can either use a sharp knife or some sharp, clean scissors. And you want to carefully do your best to harvest them just about a ½ inch to an inch above the soil. So I'm just kind of gently grabbing some from the top without squeezing them in my hand, and then carefully getting my knife or my scissors below. You might be wondering what I'm going to do with this leftover soil and stems and roots that I have after harvesting my microgreens. Please do not throw it in the trash. That potting soil that these grew in and all of these stems and roots are very nutritious for the compost. So please add them to the compost. Okay, so that's it. I've got a nice freshly harvested big bowl of microgreens ready to go in the fridge and then to use on all my meals. They're great in everything, just like how you use sprouts. On sandwiches, in soups, in salads, or you can garnish whatever you're eating with plenty of these nutritious microgreens. And they're also great just as a fresh, nutritious snack anytime.